His name is the Ancient Wither, and he will rule again. Long ago in the ancient times, the Nether was ruled by a beast that many would come to know as the Wither. And he, along with his loyal followers, built massive fortresses all across the Nether. And he and his followers were able to gather massive amounts of gold, and they all became very wealthy because of that. And so life was amazing for all of the Wither's followers, and they ruled the Nether with an iron fist for centuries. As for those who disagreed with the Wither or refused to join him, well, they weren't around for too much longer. And so those were the golden years for the Wither and his followers, as it was a time where life just kept on getting better and better and better. However, that constant improvement wouldn't last forever, as after a few bad decisions, the Wither was forced into an eternal slumber and was absorbed into the lava oceans, never to be seen again. And after that, his followers slowly began losing power over the Nether, as they did truly rely on the strength of the Wither to control everyone through fear. And so soon, they were forced into a very dark time in their history, as the piglins were starting to rise up to fill that power vacuum left from the Wither, and they began attacking the Wither's followers and their fortresses. And so because of these attacks, all construction work for the new fortresses stopped. The high quality of life that the Wither followers once had stopped. The riches that they were once able to collect stopped. And so life would just go on a downward spiral for these followers, and they would never recover. Meanwhile, the piglins were celebrating as their empire was growing, their bastions were growing, their wealth was growing, everything was going great for them, as they were now ruling the Nether. But for those Wither skeletons, those blazes, those skeletons, well, they were all just forced to watch as they lived on in pain and suffering and poverty, while the piglins lived in luxury. And so this caused quite some anger to fire up in many of them, and so some of them even tried to revolt against the piglins. However, none of them could really fight back against the strong forces of the piglins, and so nothing would be done for thousands of years, and the decline of the Wither's followers and their society would only continue getting worse and worse. That was until one day when the Wither skeleton, who was secretly hiding in a piglin bastion trying to find some gold to steal, ended up finding something special instead, as he found a book hidden in a chest. Now, that normally wouldn't be too big of a deal, as there were books everywhere, but this book was unique, as it had a Wither on the front of it. No other book by the piglin ever had that. This must have been one of their old books. And so, seeing as this was very strange for the Wither skeleton to see, he decided to open it up and read it. And well, he was shocked at what he saw, as the book that he had just found was a book from the golden ages of the Wither society. And even more shocking, this book had the coordinates where the Wither had fallen. Those coordinates had been lost for thousands of years, and many of the Wither society had died just trying to rediscover it. And he, just by chance, had found it. And so he began slowly sneaking his way out of the bastion. And then, once he was safe, he began on the month-long trek to the coordinates in this book. And well, after a few months, he had arrived at the coordinates. But all he saw were the broken remains of another fortress and a small lava lake. And so he looked again at his book and saw that the coordinates were correct, and that more specifically, they were right in the center of that lava lake. And so he began walking closer and closer towards the lava lake bed to see if there were any other clues around about the Wither, or even how to get to that center of the lava lake where the coordinates were. But as he did so, a voice spoke to him.
At last, you found me. I need your help. All you have to do is gather the skulls of 3 of your kind. Just 3, and bring them back here. And then with that, I can finally be reawakened. And then, together, we can take back the Nether from those disgusting piglins. And once again, we can rule.
That shocked the Wither skeleton, as he recognized that voice. That was the Wither. And so, he knew he had to find a way of getting those skulls to resurrect the Wither. As the Wither was their god, and he knew he couldn't disappoint him. However, getting the skulls of his friends just sounded wrong to him, as he didn't want to kill his own friends, even if that did mean he could save everyone else. It just wasn't right, as that would just make him just as evil, if not more so, than the piglins. But as he was trying to solve this moral dilemma, he hears an explosion in the distance. It was the piglins. They were destroying yet another fortress. Wait, that gave him an idea. Maybe, just maybe, those who were killed in that explosion could just have their skulls lying around. And it wouldn't really matter if you picked them up, because they were already dead. That could work. And so he began running towards that explosion, and he walked into the ruins of that fortress. It was a devastating sight, as thousands were killed, and much of the fortress was destroyed. However, his theory was correct, as the heads of those fallen were still lying around. And so the Wither skeleton reluctantly picked them up, and he returned to the Wither's fallen lava pit. And then he threw the heads into the lava pit and took a step back. And then nothing happened. Did he do it wrong? He wasn't too sure, and so he began walking closer and closer to the lava pit, when suddenly the world began to shake a little bit, and then the Wither arose from the lava.
Finally, I have returned.
But as he rose up, he looked different to what had been described in legends, as he looked old, ancient almost, and he looked redder. But regardless of that, the Wither skeleton that had summoned him began bowing down to the ancient Wither, knowing the unlimited power he possessed. And so now, with the ancient Wither on their side, the Wither followers finally began to fight back against the piglins. And the piglins and their bastions were decimated by the ancient Wither, as he could just so effortlessly destroy them with all of his power. And so the ancient Wither, over a short few days, destroyed thousands of piglin bastions, and soon everyone knew the Wither was back, and everyone who didn't follow him feared him greatly. And so it was because of that fear that no one tried to fight back, as anyone that was thinking about fighting back knew they would lose. And so peace was artificially restored in the Nether, as the ancient Wither began to rule the dimension. And so it was the first time in thousands of years that the Wither followers were prospering, and so they could finally restart the construction of their fortresses again, and they could finally start building their wealth again. And the ancient Wither even taught the skeletons how to create a weaker clone of himself, another Wither as such. And so that way, in the unlikely scenario that the ancient Wither was ever defeated again, the followers wouldn't go back into a dark time of suffering. And so overall, it was a great time for the ancient Wither and his followers. But still, even with his followers now prospering and the piglins now suffering, the ancient Wither still felt as if there was more to be gained, as he had spent so long under that lava pit that the short time he had been awake just felt meaningless. There must be more. And so that's when the ancient Wither started to have flashbacks, only for moments, where he could see a land outside the Nether. It was peaceful. and it didn't have lava. That was his homeworld. He remembered it, and so he flew into the air to speak to his people.
There is another world outside this place. I remember it now. And that place is where we shall spread to next.
All of his followers were intrigued, and so they all wanted to know more, as they had never heard of any other world outside the Nether. And so the ancient Wither began flying down to a ruined portal, which was located on a small island in the lava ocean.
I think I remember how to activate it.
And so the ancient Wither, through the use of his explosions, was able to light that ruined portal, and everyone was stunned at the result, as they had never seen this magical glowing block before.
This will take us to the other world.
All the Wither followers were so intrigued, and as such, they all began running towards this mystical portal without question. And when they went through, they were taken to the overworld, and more specifically, a desert pyramid. And so the ancient Wither rose from the pyramid and spoke once again.
Beings of this world, it is I, the ancient Wither, and I am here today to take control of your world. You have two choices: either join me at my conquest, or don't, and suffer for all of eternity.
Every being in the overworld heard his scream, from the nearby villagers to the faraway explorers. Yet, no one came to him. They all thought that this must have been some sort of trap. And so, after a few days with no one coming to his aid, the ancient Wither spoke again.
Fine then, this new world will be mine to rule.
And so it was at that moment the parts of the Nether began spewing out of the portal and corrupting the desert. And so there was soul sand covering the desert pyramid, and there were ghasts rising into the sky. And the blazes, magma cubes, wither skeletons, zoglins and skeletons all began to appear too, ready to fight anyone in the name of their god, the ancient Wither. Meanwhile, the ancient Wither stood there in the air, feeling proud with his followers rising up, taking this world, and allowing them to grow their empire. Soon, he was going to rule this place too, and his loyal followers were going to be rewarded greatly for it. But then, suddenly, everything just disappeared. All the mobs, all the Nether spillover, the ancient Wither. As they were all taken to the end, they were all confused as they hadn't seen this world before. Not even the ancient Wither knew what this area was. But then, out of nowhere, a voice echoed all around them. It was the god of the overworld.
You were banished with her millions of years ago for a reason. You will not ever return to my world again. Enjoy your suffering.
Banished? The ancient Wither didn't remember that, and all of his followers were looking up at him as they felt betrayed. But then the ancient Wither started to remember what had happened. He was once a skeleton in a wealthy city, but then he was infected with something, and he was thrown into the ruined portal, and then after that, well, he couldn't remember. How did he become the Wither? And so he just floated there for a while, thinking about it. But as he was standing there, he began hearing the cries of his people as their part of the overworld was sinking into the void of the end. The ancient Wither saw this and started to try flying higher and higher to avoid the void. However, he couldn't fly high enough to avoid it. And so he let out one more attack before being completely consumed by the void. Was this truly his end? To die with no long-term impacts? Well, no. As that projectile he let off at that last moment, when it collided with the end island, was so strong that the entire end began to shake. It was so strong that even the god of the end could feel it. And whilst normally that wouldn't be too big of a deal for him, at that moment, he was casting a spell. and that shaking interrupted him, and so his spell malfunctioned, and the Ender Spirit ended up creating a monster because of that. A monster that many will come to know as the Billy. And so to find out what happens next with this Billy creature, you'll need to watch this video.